The click of my shoes against the stage floor rang out across the otherwise silent auditorium. Overhead, the lights beat fiercely against my skin, branding me in my cheap navy blue jacket. My lips were dry, the lump in my throat so hard I could hardly swallow. Out in the darkness, people squirmed and checked watches. The roar of the AC was the only thing that seemed to want to listen. This was my shot. The Lisbon Literary Innovators Prize, a last-chance hope for the wildly optimistic, those who believed a single pitch could change a life. I cleared my throat, my tongue tasted salt and old coffee. My name is Diogo Almeida and my voice faltered, I swallowed, a few muffled snickers drifted in. A woman in tailored beige, whom I recognized shamefully as Dona Teresa Coutinho, matriarch of half of Belame's publishing houses, raised an eyebrow. I tried again, clinging to the shaky edge of my script. I'm a novelist, I didn't get to finish. Row 3 began to giggle. Two young men in pressed shirts shot each other conspiratorial looks, as if they'd plotted the ambush in advance. Novelist, one of them called, not really bothering to whisper. What's new? You people think you're Pessoa if you own a laptop. A wave of titters rolled forward. My cheeks prickled under the stage lights. I pressed on, defiance mounting in my stomach, rising hot and wild and reckless. I launched into my pitch, voice small but persistent, about authenticity, about stories that could hold a mirror to Lisbon, the city's 1,000 hidden faces. About the manuscript that had gutted me and glued me back together. My words, the novel, pressed so tight against my ribs I thought something might crack loose, but as I spoke, their eyes glazed over. I saw one man mouth along with me, mockingly. He must have read my earlier submission, already dismissed. At the 3-minute mark, Dona Teresa checked her phone. A judge in the back let out a sigh so pronounced it might have blown me right off stage. 10 minutes later, they thanked me with brittle politeness and a side of thinly veiled sarcasm. The last thing I heard as I trudged away was the younger man hissing, maybe he should try stand-up, not fiction, and the laughter that followed. I let the doors swing shut before they could see my hands shaking. Lisbon, with its golden sunlight and the honeyed odor of springtime orange blossoms, felt deeply indifferent to my humiliation. I carried that humiliation home, wearing it like a soaked coat that wouldn't dry. Mafra Street, 3 metro stops and an awkward walk from my childhood neighborhood, was never happier to see me than my family was when I slunk up our staircase, pretending I hadn't just died a little on stage. Our flat was thick with the scent of my mother's bacalhau à bras, sharp fried onions, and the brine of olives. Inside, the television blared the evening news, voices rattling against the cracked tile walls. Diogo, you're back early. My mother peeked out from behind a wall of steam, apron threatening to revolt from her midriff. Her voice was a song I'd known since the crib, layered with worry and that heavy, knowing tone she saved for when the world disappointed one of her boys. My father set down his wine a little too hard. Well, how did it go? Did you convince those editors to invest millions? We can finally retire, Lucia. His laugh was short and a little bitter. He gave my shoulder a squeeze, but behind his smile lurked what he'd said last night, that stories were for dreamers and the damned, not for honest bread. He was a mailman, raised in hills above Porto, and his dreams had always been more practical. I didn't answer right away. My sister, Jonah, sidled in, hair newly purple, scuffed black boots leaving a streak on the tiles. Let me guess, she drawled. They're dying to publish a big sob story about fado singers and Miss Trams, right? My mother tried to hush her. Diogo pitched a novel, Jonah, you don't know how. I know nobody in this country gets rich off books, Jonah snapped, except maybe Saramago, and he's literally dead. She rammed a fistful of bread into her mouth. Maybe if you tried medicine or teaching, my father said softly this time, as if hopeful I could be reasoned with. Stories are just words, Diogo, words are air, people need something solid. Like plumbing. It hurt more that he meant to be gentle. Still, I lifted my chin and told them I'd try again, another publisher, another contest, anything. My mother made the sign of the cross behind the pot, as if praying some of my ambition would vaporize along with the steam. But dinner was mostly silence, broken by the news anchor listing the latest flux in tourism. I spent the evening at my tiny desk, staring at my manuscript, over 4 years, 400,000 words, and about as much hope as a broken tram on a Sunday morning. Time peeled away in strips. Every week it seemed my circle of well-wishers grew louder, still scribbling in corners, Diogo. They'd laugh at family anniversaries, always loud enough for the table to hear. Aunt Margarida, a woman who claimed to have read one book, the Bible, and nothing since, scoffed into her soup. People need real work, not stories. My uncle Manuel, king of local construction, offered to get me a part-time job mixing cement. I'd like to say my dignity spared me from accepting. In truth, I needed the rent money. When relatives asked about the book at every birthday or holiday it strung, sometimes softly, sometimes sharp, always lingering. I learned to laugh it off, to wink and say, "You'll all want signed copies when it's famous," but my voice betrayed me on bad days. Once, at a local festa, I heard two cousins whisper by the grilled sardines, "He's delusional, poor thing. Too smart and too dumb at once, that's the problem." Lisbon itself became both solace and accusation. I'd walk the stony paths by Miradero de Santa Catarina, watching city lights shiver on the Tagus. I wrote in battered notebooks, cramped on benches between tourists and students. I eavesdropped at tram stops, gathering scraps of voices and stories that I wove into my own. Sometimes in that twilight between day jobs and night scribbling, fear curled up beside me. Maybe they were right, maybe wanting too much too loudly was a flaw, but every time I tried to stop, the words bled out. I couldn't not write, any more than I could stop needing air. 10 submissions over the next year yielded 2 polite rejections, 6 that didn't bother to answer, and 1 firm "not our taste." On the 10th at 3 a.m., when I was as brittle as century-old tile, an email arrived. I half expected another "unfortunately," but the subject line glowed, "A new voice for Lisbon, welcome to our list." An international publisher based in Barcelona, no less, was starting a New Voices from Old Cities campaign. They didn't talk about market projections or unique platforms. They wrote simply that my Lisbon felt real, that the story startled them. I wept into my pillow and wondered if I was hallucinating. My family hardly believed it until the contracts arrived. Even then my father said, "Let's see if it sells. Most books end up as shelf dust." No. Publication moved slowly, as these things do. I kept writing, kept up odd jobs, but the book, now with a proper title, binding and cover, became real, first in Spain and Portugal, then drips of interest in Italian and English, a few interviews on local radio. The big prize, though, was the nomination, the Lisbon Literary Prize. The same critics who'd snickered at my pitch now wrote perhaps the defining novel of post-crisis Lisbon. I pinched myself so often I bruised. People who'd called me ridiculous suddenly queued with books at signings. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years sent voice notes. Even Uncle Manuel arrived with his construction crew in tow, just to see, for the record. My mother, radiant in a green dress borrowed from a friend, insisted the launch party be in Alfama, in the old family neighborhood. Everyone should see, proof Diogo, real proof. I agreed, with the silent thrill of someone who'd survived too long to take anything for granted. The party was set in a refurbished quinta above the Bairro. Its windows overlooked the city, the Tagus gleaming blue and wide beneath a sun-plunged sky. Inside, wine and pastel de nata made their circuit between clusters of old friends, teachers, publishers, and my family, every last doubter and distant cousin. People came in waves. Dona Teresa in her sharp beige swooped down, flanked by the judge who'd sighed at my pitch. "Congratulations, Senor Almeida," she said. "It seems persistence has its uses after all." Her voice almost cracked on persistence, as if the idea strung her. One by one the old guard arrived. My aunts, who'd giggled over my little hobby, clucked approval. Cousins snapped photos for Instagram. My father stood to the side, stoic but unable to hide the pride softening his eyes. Midway through, just as the soft gold of dusk touched the city, the Publishers Association president took the mic. He announced, in a voice carrying to every vine-festooned corner, "We are honored to present this year's Lisbon Literary Prize to someone who, against all skepticism and adversity, reminded us all of our city's heart. Diogo Almeida's." Applause erupted, but the moment that burned itself into me wasn't the prize itself, but what came after. Someone from the crowd, one of my loudest doubters, Bernardo, a neighborhood friend turned local realtor, shouted, "Prove it's real, Diogo. Read us something, show us what made those critics so mad." Silence, an expectant hush. I nodded, nerves crackling beneath my skin, and opened to the first page, but I didn't read the opening. My eyes wandered to a section in the heart of the book, the passage built of memory, borrowed from afternoons in this city, from the longing and smallness I'd always known. My breath trembled. I read. "We carry stories like we carry old keys, heavy in pockets we sometimes forget. We dream in borrowed rooms under promises of morning that may never come. Lisbon is both cage and flight." She gives too, her laughter hidden under her skin, and so we walk her hills unsure, scared, proud. We make of rejection a kind of faith, a muscle that hurts but refuses to rest. No one moved. I read on, daring to let every word rise and fall with the rhythm that had carried me through so many hollow nights. When I finished, there was nothing but a sharp, shining silence. Even Dona Teresa blinked hard, her mouth tight. I met the eyes of every doubter, every relative, every neighbor who'd called me ridiculous, and saw there, if not applause, something fiercer, belief. Not just in my story, but in the possibility that a boy with an impossible dream could climb all the hills and still return, book in hand. My father crossed the room. He said nothing, only wrapped me in a hug that smelled of sweat and wine and rain. Jonah smirked, but her eyes shone with pride. Then my mother, crying softly, touched my arm, whispering, "We always hoped you'd come back to us, but now I see, you never really left." As night slid over the city and the stars blinked above Alfama's steep streets, I felt the sharp edges of all those wounds begin, finally, to heal. In that room, surrounded by the city and the people who once doubted most, my ridiculous dream had become real enough to touch.